Hi guys, I wanted to do a really super interesting video for you guys today where I read you the entirety of Technology and the Tragic View by Samuel C. Florman. Because I have to write a summary for it, and I also want to make a video for you guys. So, it should be a pretty good video because it's probably a pretty good article, but the voice acting will be bad because it's me. Anyway, let's get to work. In part 2 of this book, which follows chapter 6, two writers of an earlier generation engage in a famous debate that, in many ways, epitomizes the bitter divisions between the advocates and critics of technology in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Though no longer tied to the domestic conflict over U.S. participation in the Vietnam War or the social revolution that was then raging in the United States, these pro- and anti-technology divisions still exist today. However, to treat a subject as complex as the relations of technology and society in such simplistic for or against terms is ultimately less than satisfying. Samuel Florman's insightful essay, Technology and the Tragic View, taken from his book, Blaming Technology, suggests another approach. Florman draws on the classical Greek concept of tragedy to develop a new perspective on technology. In the tragic view of life, says Florman, it is a man's destiny to die, to be defeated by the forces of the universe. But in challenging his destiny, in being brave, determined, ambitious, resourceful, the tragic hero shows to what heights a human being can soar. This is an inspiration to the rest of us. After witnessing a tragedy, we feel good, because the magnificence of the human spirit has been demonstrated. The tragic view accepts responsibility, but does not seek to cast blame. It challenges us to do with caution what needs to be done, and to consider at the same time the consequences of not acting. Florman's view is ultimately an affirmation of the value of technology in human life, tempered by a recognition of its limits in sustaining human happiness. It is a uniquely constructive approach to thinking about technology and society. Samuel C. Florman, author of the Existential Pleasures of Engineering, 1976, and several other books, is a practicing engineer and chairman of Chrysler Borg Florman Construction Company in Scarsdale, New York, one of the top 100 construction firms in the United States. His more than 100 articles dealing with the relationship of technology to general culture have appeared in professional journals and popular magazines. His most recent book, The Aftermath, a Novel of Survival, 2001, is an adventure story set on Earth after a cataclysmic collision with a comet. Florman was born in New York City in 1925. He was elected a member of the National Academy of Engineering in 1995 and is also a fellow of the American Society of Civil Engineers. He holds a bachelor's degree and a civil engineer's degree from Dartmouth College and an MA in English Literature from Columbia University. The blaming of technology starts with the making of myths, most importantly the myth of the technological imperative and the myth of the technocratic elite. In spite of the injunctions of common sense and contrary to the evidence at hand, the myths flourish. False premises are followed by confused deductions, a maligning of the scientific view, the assertion that small is beautiful, the mistake about job enrichment, an excessive zeal for government regulation, the hostility of feminists toward engineering, and the wishful thinking of the Club of Rome. These, in turn, are followed by distracted rejoinders from the technological community, culminating in the bizarre exaltation of engineering ethics. In all of this, it is difficult to determine how much is simple misunderstanding and how much is willful evasion of the truth, a refusal to face up to the harsh realities that underlie life, not only in a technological age, but in every age since the beginning of civilization. Out of the confusion has come a dialogue of sorts, shaped around views that are deemed pro-technology or anti-optimistic or pessimistic. I believe that we should be thinking in different terms altogether. House and Garden magazine, in celebration of the American bicentennial, devoted its July 1976 issue to the topic American Know-How. The editors invited me to contribute an article and, enticed by the opportunity to address a new audience plus the offer of a handsome fee, I accepted. We agreed that the title of my piece should be Technology and the Human Adventure, and I thereupon embarked on a strange adventure of my own. I thought that it would be appropriate to begin my bicentennial-inspired essay with a discussion of technology in the time of the Founding Fathers. So I went to the library and immersed myself in the works of Benjamin Franklin, surely the most famous technologist of America's early days. Remembering stories from my childhood about Ben Franklin's and the clever tinkerer, I expected to find a pleasant recounting of inventions and successful experiments, a cheering tale of technological triumphs. I found such a tale, to be sure, but along with it I found a record of calamities caused by the technological advances of his day. In several letters and essays, Franklin expressed concerns about fire, an ever-threatening scourge in colonial times. Efficient sawmills made it possible to build frame houses more versatile and economical than log cabins, but less fire-resistant. Advances in transport made it possible for people to crowd these frame houses together in cities. Cleverly conceived fireplaces, stoves, lamps, and warming pans made life more comfortable, but contributed to the likelihood of catastrophic fires, in which many lives were lost. To deal with this problem, Franklin recommended architectural modification to make houses more fireproof. He proposed the licensing and supervision of chimney sweeps and the establishment of volunteer fire companies, well supplied and trained in the science of firefighting. As is well known, he invented the lightning rod. In other words, he proposed technological ways of coping with the unpleasant consequences of technology. He applied Yankee ingenuity to solve problems arising out of Yankee ingenuity. In Franklin's writing, I found other examples of technological advances that brought with them unanticipated problems. Lead poisoning was a peril. Contaminated rum was discovered coming from distilleries where lead parts had been substituted for wood in the distilling apparatus. Drinking water collected from lead-coated roofs was also making people seriously ill. The advancing techniques of medical science were often a mixed blessing, as they are today. Early methods of vaccination for smallpox, for example, entailed the dangers of the vaccinated person dying from the artificially induced disease. In a particularly poignant article, Franklin was at pains to point out that his 4-year-old son's death from smallpox was attributable to the boys not having been vaccinated and did not result, as rumor had it, from the vaccination itself. After a while, I put aside the writings of Franklin and turned my attention to American know-how in the 19th century. I became engrossed in the story of the early days of steamboat transport. This important step forward in American technology was far from being the unsullied triumph that it appears to be in our popular histories. Manufacturers of the earliest high-pressure steam engines often used materials of inferior quality. They were slow to recognize the weakening of boiler shells caused by rivet holes and the danger of using wrought iron shells together with cast iron heads that had a different coefficient of expansion. Safety valve openings were often not properly proportioned, and gauges had a tendency to malfunction. Even well-designed equipment quickly became defective through the effects of corrosion and sediment. On top of it all, competition for prestige led to racing between boats, and, during a race, the usual practice was to tie down the safety valve so that excessive steam pressure would not be relieved. From 1825 to 1830, 42 recorded explosions killed upward of 270 persons. When in 1830 an explosion aboard the Helen McGregor near Memphis killed more than 50 passengers, public outrage forced the federal government to take action. Funds were granted to the Franklin Institute of Philadelphia to purchase this apparatus needed to conduct experiments on steam boilers. This was a notable event, the first technological research grant made by the federal government. The Institute made a comprehensive report in 1838, but it was not until 14 years later that a workable bill was passed by Congress providing at least minimal safeguards for the citizenry. Today we may wonder why the process took so long, but at the time Congress was still uncertain about its right, under the interstate commerce provision of the Constitution, to control the activities of individual entrepreneurs. When I turned from steamboats to railroads, I found another long-forgotten story of catastrophe. Not only were there problems with the trains themselves, but the roadbeds, and particularly the bridges, made even the shortest train journey a hazardous adventure. In the late 1860s, more than 25 American bridges were collapsing each year, with appalling loss of life. In 1873, the American Society of Civil Engineers set up a special commission to address the problem, and eventually the safety of our bridges came to be taken for granted. The more I researched the history of American know-how, the more I perceived that practically every technological advance had unexpected and unwanted side effects. Along with each triumph of mechanical genius came an inevitable portion of death and destruction. Instead of becoming discouraged, however, our forebears seemed to be resolute in confronting the adverse consequences of their own inventiveness. I was impressed by this pattern of progress, setback, renewed creative effort. It seemed to have a special message for our day, and I made it the theme of my essay for House and Garden. No matter how many articles one has published, no matter how much one likes the article most recently submitted, wanting to hear from an editor is an anxious experience. In this case, as it turned out, I had reason to be apprehensive. I soon heard from one of the editors who, although she tried to be encouraging, was obviously distressed. "We liked the part about tenacity and ingenuity," she said, "but, oh dear, all those disasters. They are so depressing." I need not go into the details of what follows: the rewriting, the telephone conferences, the rewriting, the gradual elimination of accidents and casualty statistics, and a subtle change in emphasis. I retreated with some honor intact, I like to believe, until the article was deemed to be suitably upbeat. I should have known that the bicentennial issue of House and Garden was not the forum in which to consider the dark complexities of technological change. My piece was to appear side by side with such articles as A House That Has Everything, Live Longer, Look Younger, and Everything's Coming Up Roses, devoted to a review of Gloria Vanderbilt's latest designs. In the United States today, magazines like House and Garden speak for those and to those who are optimistic about technology. Through technology, we get better dishwashers, permanent press blouses, and rust-proof lawn furniture. Better living through chemistry, the old DuPont commercial used to say. Not only is House and Garden optimistic, that is, hopeful about technology, it is cheerfully optimistic. There is no room in its pages for failure, or even for struggle, and in this view it speaks for many Americans, perhaps a majority. This is a lesson I learned, or I should say, relearned, in the bicentennial year. Much has been written about the shallow optimism of the United States about life viewed as a Horatio Alger success story, or as a romantic movie with a happy ending. The optimism is less widespread than it used to be, particularly as it relates to technology. Talk of nuclear warfare in a poisoned environment tends to dampen one's enthusiasm. Yet, optimistic materialism remains a powerful force in the American life. The poll takers tell us that people believe technology is, on balance, beneficial, and we all know a lot of people who, even at this troublesome moment in history, define happiness in terms of their ability to accumulate new gadgets. The business community, anxious to sell merchandise, spares no expense in promoting a gleeful consumerism. Side by side with what I have come to think of as house and garden optimism, there is a mood that we might call New York Review of Books pessimism. Our intellectual journals are full of gloomy tracts that depict a society debased by technology. Our health is being ruined, according to this view. Our landscape despoiled, and our social institutions laid waste. We are forced to do demeaning work and consume unwanted products. We are being dehumanized. This is happening because a technological demon has escaped from human control, or in slightly different version, because evil technocrats are leading us astray. It is clear that in recent years the resoluteness exhibited by Benjamin Franklin and other Americans of similarly robust character has been largely displaced by a foolish optimism on one hand and an abject pessimism on the other. These two opposing outlooks are actually manifestations of the same defect in the American character. One is the flip side of the other. Both reflect a flaw that I can best describe as immaturity. A young child is optimistic, naively assuming that his needs can always be satisfied, and that his parents have it within their power to make things right. A child frustrated becomes petulant. With the onset of puberty, a morose sense of disillusionment is apt to take hold. Sulky pessimism is something we associate with the teenager. It is not surprising that many inhabitants of the United States, a rich nation with seemingly boundless frontiers, should have evinced a childish optimism and declared their faith in technology, endowing it with the reassuring power of a parent, also regarding it with the love of a child for a favorite toy. It then follows that technological setbacks would be greeted by some with the naive assumption that all would turn out for the best, and by others with peevish declarations of despair. Intellectuals have been in the forefront of this childish displays, but every segment of society has been caught up in it. Technologists themselves have not been immune. In the speeches of 19th century engineers, we find bombastic promises that make us blush. Today, the profession is torn between a blustering optimism and a confused guilt. The past 50 years have seen many hopes dashed, but we can see in retrospect that they were unrealistic hopes. We simply cannot make use of coal without killing miners and polluting the air. Neither can we manufacture solar panels without worker fatalities and environmental degradation. We assume that it will be less than with coal, but we are not sure. We cannot build highways or canals or airports without despoiling the landscape. Not only have we learned that environmental dangers are inherent in every technological advance, but we find that we are fated to be dissatisfied with much of what we produce because our tastes keep changing. The sparkling, humming, paved metropolises of science fiction, even if they could be realized, are not, after all, the home to which humankind aspires. It seems that many people find such an environment alienated. There can never be a technologically based utopia because we discover belatedly that we cannot agree on what form that utopia might take. To express our disillusionment, we have invented a new word, trade-off. It is an ugly word, totally without grace, but it signifies, I believe, the beginning of maturity for American society. It is important to remember that our disappointments have not been limited to technology. This is a fact that the anti-technologists usually choose to ignore. Wonderful dreams attended the birth of the New Deal and later the founding of the United Nations, yet we have since awakened to face unyielding economic and political difficulties. Socialism has been discredited, as was capitalism before it. We have been bitterly disappointed by the labor movement, the educational establishment efforts at crime prevention, the ministrations of psychiatry, and, most recently, by the abortive experiments of the so-called counterculture. We have come face to face with limits that we have presumed to hope might not exist. Those of us who have lived through the past 50 years have passed personally from youthful presumptuousness to mature skepticism at the very moment that American society has been going through the same transition. We have to be careful not to define the popular mood in terms of our personal sentiments. But I do not think I am doing that when I observe the multiple disenchantments of our time. We also have to be careful not to deprecate youthful enthusiasm, which is a force for good, along with immaturity, which is tolerable only in the young. It can be argued that there was, for a while, good reason to hold out hope for utopia, since modern science and technology appear to be completely new factors in human existence. But now that they have been given a fair trial, we perceive their inherent limitations. The human condition is the human condition still. To persist in saying that we are optimistic or pessimistic about technology, to acknowledge that is to acknowledge that we will not grow up. I suggest that an appropriate response to our new wisdom is neither optimism nor pessimism, but rather the espousal of an attitude that has traditionally been associated with men and women of noble character, the tragic view of life. As a student in high school and later in college, I found it difficult to comprehend what my teachers told me about comedy and tragedy. Comedy, they said, expresses despair. When there is no hope, we make laughs. We make jokes. We depict people as puny, ridiculous creatures. We laugh to keep from crying. Tragedy, on the other hand, is uplifting. It depicts heroes wrestling with fate. It is man's destiny to die, to be defeated by the forces of the universe. But in challenging his destiny and being brave, determined, ambitious, resourceful, the tragic hero shows us what heights a human being can soar. This is an inspiration to the rest of us. After witnessing a tragedy, we feel good, because the magnificence of the human spirit has been demonstrated. Tragic drama is an affirmation of the value of life. Students pay lip service to this theory and give the expected answers in examinations, but sometimes the idea seems to fly in the face of reason. How can we say we feel better after Oedipus puts out his eyes or Othello kills his beloved wife and commits suicide than we do after laughing heartily over a bedroom farce? Yet this concept, which is so hard to grasp in the classroom, where students are young and the environment is serene, rings true in the world where mature people wrestle with burdens and problems. I do not intend to preach a message of stoicism. The tragic view is not to be confused with world-weary resignation. As Moses Haddis, a great classical scholar of a generation ago, wrote about the Greek tragedians, their gloom is not fatalistic pessimism, but an adult confrontation of reality. And their emphasis is not on the grimness of life, but on the capacity of great figures to adequate themselves to it. It is not an accident that tragic drama flourished in societies that were dynamic. Periclean Athens, Elizabethan England, and the France of Louis XIV. For tragedy speaks of ambition, effort, and unquenchable spirit. Technological creativity is one manifestation of this spirit, and it is only a dyspeptic anti-humanist who can feel otherwise. Even the Greeks, who for a while placed technologists low on the social scale, recognized the glory of creative engineering. Prometheus is one of the quintessential tragic heroes. In viewing technology through a tragic prism, we are at once exalted by its accomplishments and sobered by its limitations. We thus ally ourselves with the spirit of great ages past. The fate of Prometheus, as well as that of most tragic heroes, is associated with the concept of hubris, overweening pride. Yet pride, which in drama invariably leads to the fall, is not considered sinful by the great tragedians. It is an essential element of humanity's greatness. It is what inspires heroes to confront the universe, to challenge the status quo. Prometheus defied Zeus and brought technological knowledge to the human race. Prometheus was a revolutionary. So were Gutenberg, Watt, Edison, and Ford. Technology is revolutionary. Therefore, hostility towards technology is anti-revolutionary, which is to say, it is reactionary. This charge is currently being leveled against environmentalists and the other enemies of technology. Since anti-technologists are traditionally liberal in their attitudes, the idea that they are reactionary confronts us with a paradox. The tragic view does not shrink from paradox. It teaches us to live with ambiguity. It is at once revolutionary and cautionary. Hubris is revealed in tragic drama. Is an essential element in creativity, which is also a tragic that contributes to the failure of human enterprise. Without effort, however, and daring, we are nothing. Walter Kerr has spoken of tragedy's commitment to freedom, to the unflinching exploration of the possible. At the heart of tragedy, he writes, feeding its energy stands godlike man, passionately desiring a state of affairs more perfect than any that now exists. The description of the tragic hero well serves, in my opinion, as a definition of the questing technologist. An aspect of the tragic view that particularly appeals to me is its reluctance to place blame. Those people who hold pessimistic views about technology are forever reproaching others, if not individual engineers, then the technocratic establishments, the mega-state, the Pentagon of power, or some equally amorphous entity. Everywhere they look, they see evil intent. There is evil in the world, of course, but most of our disappointments with technology come when decent people are trying to act constructively. The essentially tragic fact, says Hegel, is not so much the war of good with evil as the war of good with good. Pesticides serve to keep millions of poor people from starving. To use pesticides is good. To oppose them when they create havoc in the food chain is also good. To drill for oil and to transport it across the oceans is good, since petroleum provides life-saving chemicals and heat for homes. To prevent oil spills is also good. Nuclear energy is good, as is the attempt to eliminate radioactivity. To seek safety is a worthy goal, but in a world of limited resources, the pursuit of economy is also worthy. We are constantly accusing each other of villainy when we should be consulting together on how best to solve our common problems. Although the tragic view shuns blame, it does not shirk responsibility. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves. We are accountable for what we do, or more often for what we neglect to do. The most shameful feature of the anti-technological creed is that it so often fails to consider the consequences of not taking action. The lives lost or wasted that might have been saved by exploiting our resources are the responsibility of those who counsel inaction. The tragic view is consistent with good citizenship. It advocates making the most of our opportunities. It challenges us to do the work that needs doing. Life, it may be said, is not a play. Yet we are constantly talking about roles, role-playing, role models, and so forth. It is a primordial urge to play one's part. The outlook I advocate seeks value in many different people playing many different parts. A vital society, like a meaningful drama, feeds on diversity. Each participant contributes to the body: social, scientist, engineer, farmer, craftsman, laborer, politician, jurist, teacher, artist, merchant, entertainer. The pro-growth industrialists and the environmentalists are both needed, and in a strange way they need each other. Out of conflict comes resolution. Out of variety comes health. This is the lesson of the natural world. It is the moral of ecological balance. It is also the moral of great drama. We cannot but admire Caesar, Brutus, and Antony all together. So should we applaud the guardians of our wilderness, even as we applaud the creators of dams and paper mills? I am a builder, but I feel for those who are afraid of building, and I admire those who want to endow all building with grace. George Steiner, in The Death of Tragedy, claimed that the tragic spirit was rendered impotent by Christianity's promise of salvation. But I do not think that most people today are thinking in terms of salvation. They are thinking of doing the best they can in a world that promises neither damnation nor transcendent victories, but instead confronts us with both perils and opportunities for achievement. In such a world, the tragic spirit is very much alive. Neither optimism nor pessimism is a worthy alternative to this noble spirit. We use words to communicate, but sometimes they are not as precise as we pretend. Then we confuse ourselves and each other. Optimism, pessimism, tragic view. These are mere sounds or scratches on paper. The way we feel is not adequately defined by such sounds or scratches. René Dubos used to write a column for the American Scholar that he called The Despairing Optimist. I seem to recall that he once gave his reasons for not calling it The Hopeful Pessimist, although I cannot remember what they were. What really counts, I suppose, is not what we say or even what we feel, but what we want to do. By saying that I espouse the tragic view of technology, I mean to ally myself with those who, aware of the dangers and without foolish illusions about what can be accomplished, still want to move on, actively seeking to realize our constantly changing vision of a more satisfactory society. I mean to oppose those who would evade harsh truths by intoning platitudes. I particularly mean to challenge those who enjoy the benefits of technology but refuse to accept responsibility for its consequences. Earlier in this essay, I mentioned the problems I encountered in preparing an article for House and Garden. I would like to close by quoting the last few lines from that much rewritten opus. The prose is somewhat florid, but please remember that it was written